So we read this morning the drowning of the Egyptians in the Red Sea, and then our ancestors sing a song, right? So you have first the men sing a song, and then the women sing a song, and then there's a midrash that the angels wanted to sing a song of praise of God as well, right? And what happens? God stops them, right? He says, Ma'aseh yadai tov'im bayam va'atem omrim shirah, right? The work of my hands is drowning in the sea. How can you sing a song of praise? Okay, and so you remember the night that it was announced that bin Laden had been killed, and crowds of people went down to the White House and they were chanting USA, USA, right? And so at the time, I was living in Norwich, Connecticut, the town most famous as Stu Rutchick's hometown. And a reporter from the New London Day called me and asked what I thought about it. And I told the reporter this midrash. And then I went on and I said, but we're not angels, right? In other words, God stopped the angels from singing, but he didn't stop the men or the women, right? So we're not angels, right? What does that mean? In other words, do I like stuff like that? I don't. Do I understand stuff like that? I do, right? In other words, we're not angels, right? We should maybe strive to be like angels, but we're not. And there are a number of places in the Talmud where it's talking about like a goal that we should strive for. And then it says, Lo nitna Torah lemalachei sharet. Okay, the Torah was not given to the ministering angels, right? Meaning, in other words, God understands that the Torah was given to human beings. Human beings are flesh and blood. We fail sometimes, okay? We fail, but the fact that we fail sometimes doesn't mean that we shouldn't strive constantly to do better, right? But and so I think sometimes we overplay the importance of this midrash, right? I mean, especially frankly in interfaith settings where we want to prove how morally superior Jews are, so we tell this midrash, right? But we sometimes, as I say, I think we overplay it because God stopped the angels from singing, right? He didn't stop us from singing, right? And far from it. I mean, we read that this morning. Gail chanted it so beautifully, right? But that entire Shirat Hayam is part of the morning davening every day of the year, right? And the Mi Chamocha, which is from Shirat Hayam, right? Part of every morning davening and every evening davening, right? So it's not like we're exactly ashamed or downplaying, right? That part of our legacy where we take joy in the defeat of our enemies, right? But then we also have that midrash, okay, which is, to me at least, it represents a sort of moral striving that we should aim for, right? And we do remember in two sort of concrete ritual ways the death of the Egyptians, right? We read the 10 plagues at the Seder, and we spill a drop of wine from our cup at the mention of each plague, right? Because our joy is diminished by the death of the Egyptians, right? And that's like everybody knows that, right? I mean, if this is news to any, I was going to say if this is news to anybody, raise your hand, but I don't even want to say that because A, I'm confident that you all know it, and B, if you don't, you'd probably be embarrassed. Okay, but the second one is a little bit more obscure, right? But you'll notice that for the 8 days of Pesach, we say Hallel, right? The Psalms of praise. But we say the full Hallel only the first 2 days. And then the last 6 days, we say the abbreviated Hallel. And the explanation for that also is because our joy is diminished over the death and the suffering of the Egyptians. Okay. And so, God says to the angels, right? My creatures are dying in the sea. How can you sing songs of praise, right? The significance of this midrash, I think, is in the phrase, my creatures, right? God is reminding us that even our enemies are still human beings. They're still created in the image of God. Okay. And we can celebrate our own deliverance, but when we do so, we should recognize that there is a cost to others, right? And this is something that is hard even for democracies to accept, right? I mean, in Israel, you have Yom Ha'atzmaut, Independence Day, right? Which the Palestinians call Yom al Nakba, right? The day of the catastrophe. And when more right wing governments are in power, they try to ban mention of the Nakba in Israeli schools, right? But the fact of the matter is, for the Palestinians, it was a Nakba. It was a disaster. And it's not, I don't think it's unpatriotic to acknowledge that, right? We can rejoice at our own deliverance while understanding that for another nation, it was a disaster. Okay. And both nations are still living with the consequence of that. And this is not to say who's at fault, because it doesn't matter. It was great for us, it was bad for them. And 77 years later, we're all still paying the price. Okay, that's a fact. Okay. And similarly, I mean, what has happened to Columbus Day in this country, right? When I was right when we were growing up, it was Columbus Day, right? And then it became Columbus Day slash Indigenous Peoples Day, right? And then it became just Indigenous Peoples Day. And I have no doubt that this coming October, it's going to be Columbus Day again, right? But we can acknowledge and should acknowledge that our presence in this country came at a cost to others, right? And that doesn't mean we're going to undo it, right? Anymore, like when people, and I have, frankly, when people ask me, what is your proposed solution to the Israeli-Palestinian conflict, you know what? I don't have a solution anymore. One state, two state, three state, blue state, doesn't matter. I mean, here's what I know. There is one country. There is one country, and in that one country, there are two peoples or two nations, and neither one of them is going anywhere, right? And and until the Arabs understand that the Jews are not going anywhere, there's going to be fighting and suffering, right? But until the Israelis understand that the Palestinians are also not going anywhere, there's going to be fighting and there's going to be suffering. So any solution that will allow the two nations that live in the one land to live together in peace, I'm in favor of. And I don't care how many states, and I don't care how, I mean, I have a preference, right? I have a preference for a two-state solution over a one-state solution because I want Israel to be a democracy and I want it to be a Jewish state. And a one-state solution means Israel's either no longer a democracy or no longer a Jewish state. And to me, that's bad. Okay, but if that's what the peoples of the region decide what they want, who am I to tell them no, right? But we have to recognize that there are two nations and nobody's going anywhere, right? Because we have to recognize that even people who are our enemies, they're still created in the image of God. And when we fail to respect that image of God, we diminish ourselves, right? And, this is the problem. I mean, so is the United States going to go in and create Gaza Lago on the Mediterranean? It's never going to happen. It's never going to happen. Okay. And, I have said for a long time that generally we are in favor of solving any problem that exists anywhere in the world, as long as it doesn't cost us any money or put any American lives at risk, right? And Gaza Lago fails on both of those accounts. Having said that, right, everything else that everybody has tried for the last 77 years has not worked either. So, maybe it's not so terrible that the president threw another idea into the hopper that's a little bit different than all the previous ideas, right? And if this can start some discussion that might lead to a more creative solution, great, right? But nobody's going anywhere, right? Nobody's going anywhere. And you have 2.5 million people in Gaza who don't particularly want to leave, right? And none of their neighbors want to take them. Why? Because, the Palestinians and the other Arabs have seen what happens when people temporarily leave, right? They temporarily left in 1948 and they're still temporary, right? And again, doesn't matter whose fault it is, right? Doesn't matter whose fault it is. And we can argue this and whatever, it doesn't matter. As they say in ungrammatical modern Hebrew, zemayesh, right? Zemayesh. This is what there is, and how it happened is less relevant than the fact that this is what there is. Okay. And so anytime you talk about forced transfer, it's a problem. So, somewhat to my surprise, frankly, the Rabbinical Assembly, the professional association of conservative rabbis to which I belong, issued this statement a few days ago. The Trump administration should be partnering with Prime Minister Netanyahu to create a serious plan to bring all of the hostages home, remove Hamas from power, protect security, and establish a partnership with a credible set of leaders who can begin rebuilding Gaza. The proposal to transfer millions of Palestinians to Arab nations and have the US military take over Gaza is a distraction from the pressing needs of Israelis and Palestinians and anathema to Jewish values and international human rights law. Forced resettlement is a devastating part of Jewish history that we should not inflict on others. The Rabbinical Assembly stands by its longstanding commitment to peaceful self-determination for all who live as neighbors in the land of Israel. Okay, a short statement, but to me, the most important part of it is that, right? I mean, as Hillel says, what is hateful to you, do not do to others, right? And we have a long history of forced transfer, right? We have been forced, right? All of us are here in this country because our ancestors were forced out of countries in Europe, right? And Israel has a majority of Mizrahi, of Eastern Jews, right? Because 750,000 Jews were forced out of Arab and Muslim countries between 48 and 56, right? So, and that's important to remember too, right? I mean, 750,000 Jews were forcibly transferred from Arab and Muslim countries and became Israelis, right? 750,000 Palestinian refugees were forced out of what became Israel and became Palestinian refugees, right? So, if the Arab nations had done for the Palestinians what Israel did for Mizrahi Jews, we also wouldn't be having this problem, right? The fact that the Rabbinical Assembly says forced transfer is anathema to Jewish values doesn't change the fact that Palestinians are still refugees primarily because of the actions of their Arab brothers and sisters, right? That is also a fact. But again, to me, the bottom line is recognize the humanity even of those who are our adversaries or our enemies, and things that have been done to us that are so hateful, we should neither do or advocate that they be done to others. Shabbat Shalom. Okay.